Attention startup leaders. Are you strapped for time but hungry for strategic insights? Introducing Managed Chaos, your go-to podcast for navigating the startup world in less time than your morning commute. Join us as we share expert advice, real-world examples, and actionable strategies to help you scale your business, allocate resources effectively, and achieve visionary results. Tune into Managed Chaos and join a community of like-minded innovators on the path to entrepreneurial success.
We've all been there. You are asked to set up your KPIs and your mind runs blank. Don't we only care about revenue and retention? Why can't those be the KPIs? Key performance indicators are not just metrics. They are the things you need to steer the ship of your business before it runs around. In this episode, we are diving into how to properly set KPIs, what matters and what's vanity. Welcome to Managed Chaos Podcast, where we give you the startup business rundown in less time than it takes for you to get to work. I'm Rachel Anderson.
And I'm Katrina Purcell.
And today we are talking KPIs. Let's just start here with the basics. What are KPIs and why are they important?
I feel like I should put on my nerd hat. So
please do.
KPIs, or key performance indicators, are definitely supposed to be quantifiable measures of performance over time based on your strategic objectives and goals. And so that's why KPIs are never going to be the same for every single organization. There are definitely some that are the same industry-wide or within certain sets of standards in how you be evaluated, but they're really about the current performance that you're trying to accomplish. And so depending on if you've got a big project, a transformation, some sort of initiative happening, you might actually set KPIs based off of that. The biggest thing is that they're a clear indication if you're on path towards those goals, because it's supposed to set it up that you can actually make changes and adjustments to reach your goal. So I'll give you an example of KPIs gone horribly wrong. So we had a sales team at a client where we said, there's a sales target. This is your target. It's a quarterly target. And we all went away thinking, okay, well, they've got a quarterly target. Well, the problem is the team was just managing to that, right? And so we get to the end of the first month and we're not anywhere closer to our quarterly target and everyone wants to know what's going on. And we go into Salesforce and we realize no sales meetings have been booked for the whole month. And so we went to the head of sales and we said, well, what's
not a good sign?
What's going on here? And he said, well, that's not, everyone's tracking towards revenue. And I said, well, how are they tracking towards revenue if they're not even having any meetings? Right. Yeah. And so you have to think about the things upstream. So how many meetings do my sales team need to have to make sure that I can make that quarterly revenue target? How many meetings, how many touch points does it take to actually have a client sign? If I have someone in my pipeline right now at 85% and we've only called them once, is that actually likely to close? And so it's really about understanding the different steps along your process so you can actually set tangible goals and measurements that your team can abide by and understand if they're on track or on pace to reach, or so you can make adjustments and pivots as necessary if you feel like you're not actually on the right path. So have you seen any KPI implementations go a bit haywire?
Oh my gosh. Yes, but I'm going to be honest. I think that might take the cake for for what I've seen. I mean, that is such an intense miss. So, but this is a great example. I think that you really talked about quantifiable, which is such an important one, because you can have like a pass fail goal, and I don't think that that's bad for a business, but that doesn't make it a KPI, right? Like that is really needing that quantification. So if that's true, how do you back into that as a business? What if you've never had to figure out what those KPIs are before? What do you do? So this is a great example of a story I have. It's not a worst case scenario, but it's definitely like you got me thinking about all the things I had to do in order to find those KPIs. So I had to create from scratch for a startup a entire marketing budget along with the sales team. And the salesperson was doing the same thing, totally from scratch. And so based on nothing, there was no data yet. This was a new company that was trying to understand what are their cost needs. How do we know if we're going to hit those projections in 3 to 5 years? How do we set this up? It was honestly a lot of research at the beginning. You look at industry best practices, you look at known metrics like conversion metrics. How many people do I need to have in order to get them to be in my pipeline? How many people in my pipeline go from the awareness stage, which is just talking about, figuring out you exist, into a consideration stage? Now I want to talk to you specifically about a product or a service you have. And then how many, percentage wise of those people go down into a decision phase where they start talking to sales and actually discovering things about the features and like there are so many pieces to that you can really break down until you have a number. And now I need 10 people in that funnel for me to convert one. Or if you want to do the same with time, you could say it will take me 3 months from the moment a person becomes identified in my systems for them to become a client. And that's if, under the best circumstances, they're actually going to make it all the way through, right? So in your example, there was a lot of missed opportunities there for there to be like red flags thrown up along the path of that monthly kind of view, both from a management perspective, watching things go down and seeing that pipeline number get farther and farther away. But then also, if you'd had all these KPIs in place in advance, you could see where those misses are, whether it's in the quantity of people coming into your funnel, whether it's the salespeople doing their job or the marketing people doing their job, whether it's, maybe there's a weird bug in the system and our things aren't getting to the customers, so they can't respond to us. Like having all of those KPIs in place give you the right kind of checkpoints to be able to see that your system is healthy.
Right. It's so important. I think that they're the indicators, they're the red flags, right? They're the things that are supposed to sort of set off an alarm bell. That's your smoke alarm. And it's really something that should be kind of guiding you on your path, not something that tells you you've already screwed up or you already didn't make your goal.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh my gosh, I want to like underline that in bold. Like 100%. It is telling you the things you need to know before that goal is due, not if you succeeded in that goal. Oh my gosh, yes, definitely. So I think that transitions us good into my next question I have for you, which is, what are some relevant KPIs that startups should consider tracking? I'm going to say from day one. Now, I know in reality, you can't track all of these metrics from day one, but I think that you should always know what the future state is and work towards that. So let's talk about that. What are the, some of the relevant KPIs? What do they mean? What do they look like? What do they measure? Things like that.
Yeah, I think it's such a good question because there's going to be some basic ones that probably apply industry wide. I think what I'll focus on here is a couple of B2B SaaS. So that would be business to business, enterprise software, and software as a service. And so thinking through your monthly recurring revenue, that's a bit of it's an indicator of whether or not you're going to make your yearly target. Your cash burn. So how much longer can you run at the unit economics that you're currently running on? Also your net promoter score. So how happy are your customers, which will help you to understand what your churn rates are going to look like. Also upsell rates. So if you have more than one product and you can start to get an idea of how often are customers buying more than one of our products, that will help you also to understand overall what your service looks like, because people aren't going to buy more products if they don't like your service. And so then also and I'll leave marketing to you, but I'm going to go on service delivery speed. So how quickly am I actually implementing folks? How quickly am I answering their questions or their problems that they might have? And then one that people I think overlook is your own employees' satisfaction. So are people happy to come work for you? Because happy employees are good customer service. And so, making sure that your team is happy and they understand. I think sometimes people tend to go for what I call vanity metrics, right? So how many website views did we have, or how many social media followers do we have? Unless you can start to tie a thread of how that actually impacts things you care about, they're really more for excitement, right? Someone clicked on it, yay, we've got another follower, okay, but are they now in the funnel, or have they just followed you and they're just a very passive follower that follows everybody, right? And so thinking about making sure that you're not tracking everything, because that's not a key indicator, right? So really making sure that you're not overwhelming your team, but thinking through, what do you really care about that's going to be that smoke alarm for you? And I'll let you go into some of the marketing ones, because I know you've got a deep background there.
Yeah. And, before I touch on marketing, I want to touch on one of the ones that you talked about, because I think that this is an underrated KPI. So, employee satisfaction. You kind of like blew my mind a little bit when you said that, because I was like, yes, Gallup just came out with a poll a couple weeks ago that said that unhappy employees are costing the industry, the economy, $1.9 trillion.
Isn't that
So if
staggering? Trillion with a T.
Trillion. Yeah, staggering. And so, I've known for a long time, working in change management, that an employee churn, one employee, costs a company up to 1.5 times their salary, because you have to think about the costs of the interviewer, the recruiter, the training costs, like all these things. So anyway, I think that is such, if companies, this is not even on topic, but if startups want to save money, keep your employees happy, hire and fire fast, someone said, which is like a hard reality, but truly, like, employee satisfaction. Okay. So anyway, shoving that to the side, because that is just, yes, agreed. Marketing. So marketing KPIs. My number one recommendation is for you to have as much information about your process as possible when it comes to KPIs. And I think that that's how you win in sales and marketing. Truly, sales and marketing are like peanut butter and jelly, yin and yang. You cannot separate one from the other, because we all have the same focus and the same driven outcomes for customer reporting. And so for me, looking at things like this, it is looking at your top revenue, dividing it into all of your quarters, knowing how much you have to make per month within your quarter. Where do those segments come from? So, for example, if you have one product, this is easy for you. Or if you have one service, that is great. But if you have multiple products or multiple services, are you expecting each product to equally bring their own items to the table, equal amounts of profit to the table? So 33, 33, 33. Or do you have one outstanding product that should bring 60% of revenue, and then 40% and 10%? So that is part of all of the different, like, kind of key performance indicators. But I would say from a process perspective, right, really breaking that down. I think that as far as some of the other helpful marketing KPIs to consider would be things like customer acquisition cost. So how much does it cost for me to get that new customer? And that is the totality of all of the programs you run, which means that you need to know how much one person is worth. So let's say, for example, if you bring in a customer, they're going to give you $10. That's great. Does it cost you $1 to get them? $2 to get them? $15 to get them? In which case, how long do you need to keep that customer in order to make that $15 spend worth it? So then that's a whole nother conversation where your churn rate can be a huge KPI that you need to know, or the customer lifetime value. How much are they worth over the course of all of your contract? Because some startups have a 1-year contract, some startups have 3-year contracts that they drive. So now, they're only going to make you $10 in the first year, but over all 3, it's $30. So understanding some of these key, key performance indicators, some of these key metric elements or flags for what your cost is, how you run organizationally, and then the decisions you make. I think those are really the big ones for me in marketing, so that you can make plans for your campaigns that make sense for your marketing and sales teams to be able to deliver.
You said something so important there, right? So it's key performance indicators are metrics. So all KPIs are metrics, but not all metrics are KPIs.
Yes.
And so in
that's
that,
going to be my full quote for this entire podcast. Yes. So what does it take to actually implement any of these KPIs, like from a bird's eye view, and feel free to use some examples?
So I think the biggest thing is having clear business objectives and SMART goals. And so going into SMART goals, just that might be a bit of a corporate buzzword. So that means that your goals are specific, that they're measurable, that they're achievable, that they're relevant to your business objectives, and that they're time bound, right? And so once you're clear and you understand that, it helps drive the business in a way that there's clarity across the organization and that things can roll down into departments where they actually understand how they're contributing to the overall business objectives. I think the biggest thing I've seen is CEOs who want to implement KPIs purely as a way to show their team's not getting their work done, right? Or how to sniff out that things aren't being done properly. And I think oftentimes what you actually will find is that those CEOs are not very good at stating the clear business objectives for everyone. They have a vision, but they might not actually have those business objectives. And so there's a disconnect between what they think is happening versus what the teams on the ground are truly executing on. And so getting stakeholder buy-in, understanding what your baselines are for these things that you want to monitor. Oftentimes, and you mentioned this earlier, you might be setting up something completely from scratch. And so for the first 3 months, you're just tracking it. And then the next, you can kind of start to say, well, first, is there anything cyclical that we need to worry about? And if not, can we use what we got over the last 3 months to help us set a baseline? And I've seen that done in quite a few implementations, and I think it's helpful. I think it's also important, as you mentioned earlier, to look at benchmarks, but making sure that you're looking at benchmarks that are relevant. So relevant to your team size, relevant to your industry, your client base, just to make sure that when you're setting those targets, you're making them actually achievable and that they're not kind of stretch. I personally do like KPIs to be a bit stretch because I think it drives the team and it drives a sense of striving to really kind of push forward and push that envelope. So I don't want them to be in the bag. They got to be a little bit stressed. You need the necessary data, obviously. If you don't have the data, you can have sort of aspirational KPIs, but you can't actually put them to use. And I think the most important part of KPIs, once you're implementing them, is to actually assign responsibility for them and then track them and actually discuss them and actually use them to make decisions, monitor it. Because what I've seen happen is we've gone through the whole effort of creating KPI process. We did this for one of my clients. We built out everything they wanted. We were able to get all the data sources, everything in place. And once I went away, it all went away because there was no owner on the team. And we had put someone as the owner, but that person really didn't want to be the owner. And so as a result, it kind of teetered off as people stopped sending in their information or as the system stopped getting updated. And so it's so important that you integrate the KPIs so much into your day-to-day that there's just no way they can fall off. Someone really has to own them, really has to be optimizing them, thinking through, okay, they shouldn't always be the same. You know, are we always better in fourth quarters? So our KPIs for fourth quarter should be higher than our KPIs in other quarters, or, you know, maybe it's the opposite. We're better in Q1. And so someone has to really be thinking through that. And whether that's your data analyst or whether that's someone on your leadership team who's actually really driving that as an overall optimization in your org.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I have recently been working with a team to specifically restructure in a way where the individual understands their direct line all the way through the pipeline. Like, you're now responsible for everything associated to those KPIs. And I think that that kind of specific ownership is really valuable when you want to, as a company, value the decisions and the processes that can come from having clarity in KPIs. And I think that that's a huge value that KPIs can bring to the average employee, and knowing if the tasks, not their overall job or their like career at the company, but like the specific tasks that they do matter to the company, because they can directly tie it to an actual KPI. And then that is something that is shared, a value that is shared from your individual contributor all the way up to the C-suite. The other thing I think is a great part of this is buy-in across the board, which just fits right perfectly in with that, right? If you have that buy-in of what is the vision, how do we get there, how will we do our milestones, aka those KPIs, and then assessment at the end of what went well, and not just revenue. I think you and I were talking about this earlier. It's not just a revenue question, but like, what is going well in general with campaigns, roles, alignments, revenue, like all of it, the holistic picture. That is how you really successfully use those KPIs to move your business forward and make sure that you have happy employees, happy stakeholders, happiness all around.
Yes, they are definitely not fix it and forget it. That is for sure.
That is for sure. Well, I love talking about data, and I'm so glad we had this conversation all about KPIs. This has been Managed Chaos, the podcast for startups, and we are definitely going to talk to you soon.
This was another informative episode of Managed Chaos, the podcast for startups. You can find us on all of your favorite podcasting apps, as well as on Instagram and YouTube, where we are at Managed Chaos Podcast. For additional resources or to continue the conversation, you can find Katrina Purcell and Rachel Anderson on LinkedIn.